Belial. The very name itself comes with a sense of foreboding. To the layman, Belial is simply just another demon in a long list of equally evil creatures, and while some readers of scripture are more than content to leave it as that, the name evokes in others a dark curiosity. And it's just as well that it does, for the mere term Belial has an intricate history within the pages of the Bible and the Hebrew language, where it evolved from a commonplace insult into the complete embodiment of a wickedness that is comparable with Satan himself. In tracing Belial not only through the Bible in this episode, but also across extra-canonical texts, I found that you could almost see how the ancient Jews and early Christians came to understand evil as a cosmic force, and how their interpretation of evil changed throughout the centuries. The same can also be said for Belial, whereby for one set of Jews it was merely an expression to vilify those they believed were sinful, and yet to another set it was a synonym for the devil himself, or even a wicked fallen angel who had his own plans as the Prince of Darkness. For some readers, Belial is very simply another name for Satan. He is the nemesis of God and the righteous. For others, Belial is seen more as a fallen angel, or something of a king of evil, who serves alongside or just beneath Satan in the master plan to bring about humanity's downfall. Yet in the earliest usage of the word within the Hebrew Bible, Belial isn't associated with either of these potential characters. In fact, it isn't used as a proper name at all. Belial, a Hebraic term, was thought to characterize the worthless or the wicked, the very etymology of the word often considered to mean the lacking of worth or value. In other interpretations, the word is thought to have meant yokeless, or to have no rising, a phrase for one not having the potential to achieve. It is also associated with the term lawless, implying a sense of defiance, a refusal to submit to moral restraint or divine authority. Rather than being referred to as a demon or fallen angel, as commonly believed, Belial, at least in its original sense, was therefore used as a label applied to people whose actions placed them outside the boundaries of the conventionally faithful. Throughout the Old Testament, the term appears most commonly in phrases such as sons of Belial or men of Belial, which we'll dissect a little bit later. These expressions describe individuals marked by extreme corruption, idolaters who led others astray, violent criminals, sexual abusers, corrupt officials, or false witnesses. The label does not suggest demonic possession or allegiance to a named evil power. Instead, it functions as a moral verdict. To be associated with Belial is to be socially destructive and fundamentally opposed to the order of God. This understanding begins to shift during the Second Temple period, particularly in Jewish writings produced between the Old and New Testaments. In this era, Jewish theology increasingly adopts a cosmic framework in which good and evil are personified and placed in opposition. Nowhere is this development clearer than in the Dead Sea Scrolls. In these writings, Belial is no longer merely a descriptive term. He becomes the leader of the forces of darkness, the commander of demonic spirits, and the cosmic enemy of God's people. The famous War Scroll portrays history as a battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, with Belial standing at the head of the latter as the angel of darkness, and an angel of light standing at the head of the former. You might then say that these two entities are positioned as sort of a good and bad set of angels, which is interesting given that in this text, Belial is then quite clearly imagined as an angel, a negative one sure, but an angel nonetheless. In fact, fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls point to Belial as being the angel of enmity, where it is said, "You made Belial for the pit, angel of enmity. In darkness is his domain. His counsel is to bring about wickedness and guilt. All the spirits of his lot are angels of destruction. They walk in the laws of darkness. Towards it goes their only desire." The Dead Sea Scrolls do go on to depict Belial as a king of evil, or as the Prince of Darkness in a dream by Amram, the father of Moses. Here we learn that Amram dreams of two angels fighting over him, and that one of them is Belial, the king of evil and the prince of darkness. Contained within the Dead Sea Scrolls are the fragments of a Zadokite work, otherwise known as the Damascus document, which states that in the final days, Belial shall be let loose against Israel. The work also attributes 3 nets to Belial, which are thought to be traps implemented by the demon to corrupt mankind. These nets are thought to be fornication, wealth, and the pollution of sanctuary. Another idea from this work suggests that Belial is an agent of God, a necessary evil that is allowed to function under the careful watch of the Lord. Here, Belial, whether he realizes it or not, is serving God in his administering of punishment to those who have sinned, or perhaps can be seen as a test by God to see who will fall for Belial's wickedness. Another idea from the text tells us that it was Belial who gave rise to the sorcerers in Egypt, those who had come to oppose Moses and Aaron. There are also fragments of the text that aim to teach believers that those who summon or entertain spirits are likely advocates of Belial, and that they should be condemned as sorcerers, wizards, or necromancers. A pseudepigraphical Christian text, known as the Ascension of Isaiah, also speaks of Belial, or Belial as he is known in this story, referring to him as an angel of lawlessness and the ruler of the world. In this story, we see Isaiah come to counsel the king of Judah, Hezekiah, seeking to warn him that his son Manasseh will become king next, but will not follow the righteous path. Furthermore, Isaiah also comes to predict his own death at the hands of Manasseh and this Belial, saying, "And many in Jerusalem and in Judea he will cause to abandon the true faith. And Belial will dwell in Manasseh, and by his hands I shall be sawn asunder." We also see Belial identified not as a demon, but again as this angel of lawlessness, as Isaiah tells us. And Manasseh turned aside his heart to serve Belial, for the angel of lawlessness, who is the ruler of the world, is Belial, whose name is Mantanbuckus. And he delighted in Jerusalem because of Manasseh, and he made him strong in apostatizing Israel, and in the lawlessness which was spread abroad in Jerusalem. In more modern interpretations, Belial becomes steadfast in his role as demon, as we see in John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost, where Belial is a principal devil in the realm of hell. Whilst he is often considered to be a tempter or a seducer in this work, he is far more akin to the sin of sloth and encourages inactivity and delay. Belial can be seen arguing against warring with heaven, not because he incites peace, but because he is the embodiment of idleness. Despite his encouragement of sloth, he appears to be eloquent and well-spoken, demonstrating a high level of intelligence and wit, as he's able to deceive other demons to see his way of thinking. Now, this all sounds really dramatic and fascinating, but the sad truth is that what we find in the biblical pages regarding Belial is much less exciting, although still worth an in-depth analysis. Belial only appears once in the New Testament, in 2 Corinthians 6:15, where we see Paul scolding the Corinthian Christians for a number of reasons. In this particular context, he's having a go at the Corinthians for being too affectionate and forgiving of those who are lawless, and that they shouldn't be so accepting of such behaviour, because one cannot accept both light and dark. One cannot appease both Christ and Satan. They must, for better or worse, pick a side. He states, "And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel?" Belial in this context is believed to have been borrowed from the original Hebrew to mean worthless and wicked, but some commentators do recognize it as a synonym for Satan. I suppose you can see why other translations such as the Common English Bible or the Voice translation replace Belial with simply Satan, perhaps so as to avoid confusion as to who exactly is being referred to here. Effectively, what Paul tries to convey here is that there is nothing in common between Christ and Belial, or Satan, and there is nothing in common between the believer and the non-believer. Therefore, the Corinthians, who were tolerating this sort of behaviour, ought not to have suffered it with open arms. The Amplified Bible, amongst several others, echo this exact same sentiment in Corinthians 6:15, but allow for a clearer, more simple wording. What harmony can there be between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Here you'll find that the Amplified translations even allow for brackets after the term Belial to indicate that this is in fact Satan, and not some rogue fallen angel from the Dead Sea Scrolls, nor some other entity that would have the average reader guessing at. In the complete Jewish Bible, we see Corinthians worded in exactly the same way, except for the spelling and pronunciation of Belial, which reads, "What harmony can there be between the Messiah and Belial? What does a believer have in common with an unbeliever?" Another spelling in the Darby translation and the Disciples' Literal New Testament refer to Belial as, "And what consent of Christ with Belial?" Or what part for a believer along with an unbeliever? Outside of this instance of Corinthians, Belial appears exclusively in the Old Testament, where it is recognized, as aforementioned, as a term to describe a person of lawlessness, or being yokeless or spiritually defiant. The first time we see Belial mentioned in the Old Testament is in Deuteronomy 13:13, where Moses is relaying warnings of God to the Israelites. We are told, "Certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you, and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, Let us go and serve other gods, which ye have not known." Once more, the term children of Belial can be interpreted as children of worthlessness or wickedness, not actual children of a demon or a devil. In this context, Moses is warning the Israelites that there could be people amongst them who are not God-fearing, and who could attempt to hoodwink others into following and worshipping other deities. These sorts, Moses later advises, ought to be investigated, and there is an implication here that the people should resist such suggestions, and then later punish these children of Belial who recommended such sacrilege. Belial then appears again in the rather graphic Judges 19, where a travelling Levite and his concubine are seen to take shelter at an old man's house in Gibeah. During the night, the men of the city, believed to be the Benjaminites, but described here as the sons of Belial, proceed to descend on the house and beat at the door, demanding to have sexual relations with the Levite. We are told, "Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. When the old man and the Levite refuse, he sends out his concubine to mollify the sons of Belial, who end up raping and killing her. The term sons of Belial therefore proves chillingly apt, describing offenders who embody the most extreme forms of lawlessness and moral depravity. The term sons of Belial appears again in the next chapter of Judges, where the Israelites, who are seeking justice on behalf of the Levite, seek to punish these very offenders by requesting the Benjaminites surrender them. We are told, "Now deliver us the men, the children of Belial, which are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death, and put away evil from Israel." But the children of Benjamin would not hearken to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. The term Belial then appears most frequently in the first book of Samuel, where we see it first appear in the story of Hannah, a woman whose personal anguish leads to the birth of one of Israel's most important figures, Samuel. The chapter centers on Hannah's barrenness and her deep emotional suffering, which is made worse by the taunts of Peninnah, her husband Elkanah's other wife, who had children. During a pilgrimage to the sanctuary at Shiloh, Hannah prays silently and desperately to God, vowing that if she is given a son, she would dedicate him entirely to God's service. Her silent prayer is initially misunderstood by the priest Eli, who assumes she is drunk, but once she explains herself, he blesses her. It is during this explanation that she uses the term Belial, where we are told, And Hannah answered the priest and said, "No, my lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial." Evidently, Hannah attempts to justify her righteousness and distance herself from any wickedness or ill characteristics that Eli might suspect of her, by telling him that she is not a daughter of Belial. She is not the sort of person to commit evil, and is very much God-fearing. This is pretty ironic that Eli needs to be told this, because in the second chapter of 1 Samuel, we are outrightly told that Eli's own sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were in fact sons of Belial themselves. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. In this chapter, we see that as the sons of the high priest, they abuse their office by stealing from sacrifices and taking the best portions of meat for themselves. They show contempt of worship and proceed to sleep with the serving women at the entrance to the tent of meeting, thus corrupting the sacred place. Later in the first book of Samuel, we see Saul elected as the first king of Israel and anointed by Samuel with oil, who declares that the Lord has chosen him to rule over Israel. This anointing is not yet made public, but it establishes Saul's authority in the eyes of God first, before it is acknowledged by the people. Through this, it is confirmed that Saul's kingship is divinely appointed, rather than merely a human political decision. Despite some later reluctance on behalf of Saul, the people of Israel do mostly accept him as their king, though the end of the chapter does give voice to some dissenters. I'm sure you can guess who. But the children of Belial said, "How shall this man save us?" And they despised him, and brought no presents, but he held his peace. Yet again, the children of Belial proved to be on the wrong side of God. They aren't in favour of God's decision, they do not recognise his choice of king, and they refuse to honour him in any capacity. In this, we might understand that the children of Belial aren't just the worst of the worst sinners, but can also stretch to include those who resent God and his choices, or those who believe they know better than he does. I'm sure if you were to ask the sons of Belial in this instance, they would have a better recommendation for kingship than Saul, and would be more than willing to explain why they thought God had chosen wrong. By chapter 25 of 1 Samuel, we see two mentions of Belial. We learn that Samuel has passed away and David has become a fugitive and is living in the wilderness. Whilst here, his men begin protecting the flocks of a wealthy man named Nabal, and as they are in his service, David asks Nabal for some provisions during the sheep shearing season, traditionally a time associated with generosity. However, because Nabal doesn't really know who David is, he refuses the request and proceeds to mock him. Enraged by this, David rallies up his men and intends to destroy Nabal's household. However, one of the young men of the household learns of the plan and proceeds to inform Nabal's wife Abigail of what is about to transpire. Interestingly, even they recognize the folly of Nabal and voice their concerns over Nabal's judgment and character. "Now therefore know and consider what thou wilt do, for evil is determined against our master, and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak to him." Here you might argue that selfishness and lack of good judgment can also be traits associated with being a son of Belial, for the servant of the household appears to refer to his own master as one with steadfast conviction. There's also an implication here that one who is stubborn or unwilling to listen to reason, or perhaps close-minded, might also be considered a son of Belial, for the young man implies that no one can talk to Nabal or convince him otherwise once he has made up his mind. When David advances with his men upon the household of Nabal, it is Abigail who goes out to meet him and procures for him all the provisions he asked for, against her husband's wishes. Appeasing to David, Abigail says, "Let not my lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my lord, whom thou didst send. Here we see the second mention of Belial in this chapter, with Abigail referring to her own husband as a man of Belial, based on his obstinance and frugality. Folly is with him, she explains to David, effectively reiterating how the servant of the household described him, and obviously agreeing with the sentiment enough to repeat it to David. Luckily, David is appeased by Abigail and does not lead his men to destroying Nabal's household. This is just as well because later, God is seen to kill Nabal for his insolence anyway. The final use of Belial in 1 Samuel comes after David has taken 600 of his men and attacked the Amalekites, who had scorned David and his men by abducting their wives and all of their possessions. 200 of the men are tired and sick, however, and so when the battle commences, only 400 of David's men fight. After leading a surprise attack on the Amalekites and catching the enemy unawares, the 400 men of David proved to be more than enough to overwhelm and completely rout them. The captured wives and possessions are rescued, and having captured the Amalekite territory, David and his men come into more spoils than they'd had before. However, we are told that there were wicked men amongst the 400 soldiers who did fight, and they told David not to share the spoils with the 200 ill and tired men who were too fatigued to fight. They answered, all the wicked men and men of Belial, of those that went with David, and said, because they went not with us, we will not give them aught of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. In a similar vein to Nabal, it isn't always necessary to be a malicious sinner in order to be considered a child or man of Belial. Here in this example of David's men, all one needs to be is greedy, parsimonious, or lacking of any compassion for those who are less fortunate. There is an implication in this text that there were more than enough spoils to go around, which is why David rejects the suggestion that the 200 men should go without a share. So the fact that these wicked men amongst the 400 who did march even suggest this goes to show the magnitude in their avarice. In this we can gather that one who attempts to further their own gain at the expense of others, or who attempts to maintain more for themselves and less for everyone else, can also fit into the category as a person of Belial. Belial sees a similar use throughout the second book of Samuel as well. When David flees from Jerusalem after his son Absalom usurps him, a Benjaminite known as Shimei hurls insults at David, referring to him as a man of blood, suggesting that David was responsible for many wars and violence, as well as implying that David himself had wrongfully usurped the former King Saul, of whose household Shimei belonged to. And thus said Shimei when he cursed, come out, thou bloody man, and thou man of Belial." In this instance, Belial is used to depict someone who, in the opinion of Shimei, is violent and has caused a lot of bloodshed. Whether Shimei is fair with his insults is up for some debate, but we do see the term Belial incorporates yet another set of undesirable characteristics, those who are aggressive, bloodthirsty, and or scheming. As we've seen across several biblical chapters now, the Benjaminites seem to be recognized most frequently as the men of Belial. Evidently, from certain periods of time, the Bible didn't seem to think all that much of them. This notion continues in 2 Samuel 21, where we see another Benjaminite try his luck against David by actually instigating a revolt of his own. And there happened to be a man of Belial whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite, and he blew a trumpet and said, "We have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel." From this account, we see that anyone who revolts or attempts to instigate resistance against God's chosen people, in this case David, can be considered a man of Belial. As with previous accounts, the Bible reaffirms here that anyone who opposes God or attempts to obstruct the path of those he has plans for is effectively a villain, and in the case of Sheba, they will come to meet with a not so peaceful end. The last mention of Belial in the books of Samuel comes in 2 Samuel 23:6 and appears within David's last words. Here David tells us of the incompatibility of righteousness with wickedness by describing the sons of Belial as thorns that must be thrust away. But the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. Here Belial once again refers to the worthlessness and lawlessness of sinners, people whose violent or corrupt behaviour threatens the moral order. The thorn imagery emphasises danger, illustrating how such a people cannot be handled or reformed by ordinary means, only removed. One cannot shape or remould a thorn, and even if they tried, they could not do so without pricking themselves. The following verse reinforces this by invoking iron tools and fire, which serve as symbols of judgment as opposed to correction. Spoken at the end of David's life, the verse functions as a warning that some evils cannot coexist with justice and blessings, and must ultimately be dealt with decisively. Next, the term Belial appears twice for the final time in 1 Kings, where Naboth is framed through false witness by the machinations of Jezebel. In this narrative, we see that when Naboth refuses to sell his vineyard to King Ahab, his wife Jezebel intervenes in an effort to rob Naboth of his property completely. We see that she writes letters in Ahab's name and seals them with his seal, before sending them to the elders and nobles in the city. In these letters, she instructed them to proclaim a fast and set Naboth on high among the people, and set 2 men, sons of Belial, before him, to bear witness against him, saying, "Thou didst blaspheme against God and the king," and then carry him out and stone him that he may die. Considering Jezebel's character, it's interesting that she draws a distinction between herself and the sons of Belial. Given how scheming and immoral she was, one might reasonably expect her to be counted among them, if not described as a daughter of Belial. Yet she is the one deploying the term, as if she stands apart from these evildoers. Perhaps this is a deliberate effort by the authors of the Bible to showcase her delusion and haughtiness, highlighting that sometimes a person can become so evil that they do not recognize the evil in themselves. You might also take away that anyone who bears false witness or lies about something could also therefore be characterized as sons of Belial. The terrible thing about Jezebel's scheme is that it actually works, for we are told, "And there came in 2 men, children of Belial, and sat before him. And the men of Belial witnessed against him, even against Naboth, in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth did blaspheme God and the king. Then they carried him forth out of the city, and stoned him with stones that he died." In the last mention of Belial in the Old Testament, we see King Abijah deliver a speech to the northern kingdom of Israel, explaining how Israel's rebellion began, and why Jeroboam's rule was illegitimate. Abijah declares that worthless men, sons of Belial, gathered around Jeroboam and rose up against Rehoboam, Solomon's son. He emphasizes that Rehoboam was young and inexperienced, and that the rebels overpowered him, seizing control and splitting the kingdom. "And there are gathered unto him vain men, the children of Belial, and have strengthened themselves against Rehoboam, the son of Solomon." Here the sons of Belial emerge as vain and hollow men, who gravitate towards rebellion the moment they sense vulnerability. They gather around Jeroboam when Rehoboam is young and unestablished, sensing an opportunity to better themselves rather than remaining loyal to what's already been decided. The chronicler's language is deliberately dismissive. Stripping these figures of any moral weight or heroic framing, they are presented as opportunists who exploit disorder. By naming them sons of Belial, the text reduces them to the typical connotations we've come to expect of sons of Belial: men defined by worthlessness, driven by ego and self-interest. When you isolate the biblical text from the more diverse and dramatic extra-canonical texts, you do get a plainer, more rigid understanding of what the original authors were trying to convey. Belial becomes simply a connotation for someone evil, or in the New Testament case, he becomes synonymous with Satan. The scriptures show little interest in dramatic or theatrical evil. Instead, they place responsibility for sin firmly in the hands of man and minimize the supernatural element, presenting man himself as the evildoer rather than an external demonic force. Considering these were always people of Belial, or sons of Belial, I suppose it was almost inevitable that someone would end up personifying Belial and further demonize him in extra-canonical works. Even today, upon first glance, it is quite tempting to imagine that these sons of Belial were made evil because they had been influenced by some demon or fallen angel, and thus were made to act the way that they did. It is therefore unsurprising that later authors, particularly during the Second Temple period, would develop the Belial found in the Dead Sea Scrolls and present him as a real malevolent being, capable of inspiring the kinds of acts already attributed to his followers in the biblical narrative. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.